In Syria, a man is in a cage in a courtroom for the crimes of the Assad regime. Lots of people are relieved to see him there. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Today, the trial of Atif Najib. Also, the war in Iran started almost 2 months ago. Business people there are feeling the pain.
The internet shutdown has been really devastating for them.
Plus, 2 runners made history at the London Marathon by running the whole thing in under 2 hours.
I didn't think I'd ever see this happen.
And a state visit to the U.S. is a diplomatic test for King Charles.
No matter how much Buckingham Palace or the British government try to control things, they can't predict what the U.S. president might say or do.
All that today, here on The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Thank you for being with us today. We start in Mexico, where free and universal health care is a constitutional right. For a long time, though, Mexicans have struggled to get the medical care they're entitled to, not because they are not covered, but because access is difficult.
Now the country's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, is announcing a new program that she hopes will change that. The World's Tibisa Isaiah spoke with patients and health experts about why the system falls short and whether this new plan could make a difference.
I spoke with nearly a dozen people in Mexico City, and they didn't have a lot of good things to say about their public health system.
Tengo que ir a formarme desde las 9 de la mañana para salir a las 4 de la tarde.
Naomi Garcia says even a basic visit can take most of your day. Lining up at 9 in the morning and not leaving until 4 p.m.
Porque te tardas demasiado tiempo, en primera, pues sacar una cita ahí.
Joseph Arredondo says it can take many months just to get an appointment. He also complains about overcrowded clinics and shortages of staff.
También por cuestiones del medicamento, luego me sucede
Mari Carmen Pérez says medications often run out, and sometimes she hasn't received adequate care. Another common problem is many people are assigned to clinics far from home.
Porque ir a mi clínica de ISSSTE me toma más.
She says in a city as large as Mexico City, that can mean a commute of up to 2 hours to go to an appointment. So people find ways around the public system. Many go to private pharmacies. If you walk around almost any neighborhood in Mexico, you will see pharmacies with a small doctor's office attached. Out front, there is often a familiar figure. A life-size mascot in a white coat, dancing and inviting people in. He's known as Dr. Simi, the face of a chain of low-cost pharmacies. Walk in and you can see a doctor in minutes. No appointment needed.
Pues te atienden muy rápido.
They see you quickly and the doctors are qualified, says Joseph Arredondo.
Es muy barato también, entonces muy accesible.
Consultations are very cheap, very accessible, Arredondo says. It can cost just a few dollars. Sometimes it's even free. But these clinics were never meant to replace a full health system. Doctors usually don't have access to your medical history. There is little follow-up care. And because they are tied to a private pharmacy, there can be pressure to prescribe medications on the spot, which can be obtained there. But for millions of Mexicans, this is where primary health care actually happens. Alejandro Macías is an infectious disease specialist and former health official in Mexico.
La salud nunca ha tenido un buen presupuesto en México.
He says the public system is underfunded because healthcare doesn't win votes in Mexico. The government spends about 3% of its GDP on public healthcare, and that's half of what the World Health Organization recommends for a functioning system. Funding is not the only issue. The system is also unequal. It depends on your job.
There is a bifurcation between those who have Social Security because they work in a salaried position and everyone else.
Felicia now is a health economist and a professor at UCLA. She explains if you have a salaried job in Mexico, you are covered through one system. If you work for the government, that's another. But if you work independently or in the informal sector, you are stuck with a third system, one with even less resources. And in Mexico, that's a lot of people. More than half of workers are in the informal sector. Street vendors, domestic workers, freelancers. And they are covered by a system that can't meet demand. Viri Rios is a Mexican analyst who's written about healthcare.
Actually, a large share of care is delayed, and many households still pay out of pocket because the system just can't deliver the services that they need.
So a lot of people skip public hospitals and go to private clinics. Some have private insurance, but a lot don't, so they have to pay out of pocket. Felicia now says a single illness can break you financially.
The worst way to finance a health system is to have people pay at point of service for any kind of care. It generates catastrophic and impoverishing health expenditure.
Now, President Claudia Sheinbaum says she wants to fix this. Her plan is to integrate all the different institutions so patients can get care at any of them. She's also introducing a new health card. It connects patients to a digital record so any doctor in the system can see their medical history. Felicia now says that's a good first step.
Am I hopeful about this? In many ways, yes. Having that card and that digitalized system for the entire population would be hugely important.
But she also says reform alone is not enough. Mexico would need to spend much more on doctors, hospitals, and supplies. Analyst Viri Rios told me that you can't declare universal healthcare. You have to build it. For the world, I'm Tibisay Sea, Mexico City.
Britain's King Charles and Queen Camilla have arrived in the U.S. today on a 4-day state visit to mark the 250th anniversary of U.S. independence. It is the first state visit by a British monarch in almost 2 decades. The trip comes at a time of strained relations between London and Washington. Britain has resisted pressure to support U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying the conflict is not our war. King Charles's visit is being closely watched in London, where officials may be hoping it will help defuse tensions between President Trump and Starmer. The World's Europe correspondent Orla Barry is following the story as well. So I wonder how important this visit is for the British government, Orla, and what King Charles's capacity is to reset relations between the two countries.
Right. Officially, King Charles is supposed to be above day-to-day politics, right? So essentially, he's a sort of a symbol of British soft power. He's not supposed to comment on policy or affairs of the state. And yet we see officials saying this is being seen as his most important diplomatic mission yet. Partly because no matter how much Buckingham Palace or the British government try to control things, they can't predict what the US president might say or do. And tensions between the two sides, as you point out, haven't been this high for decades. So we've Keir Starmer today saying the purpose of the visit is to mark the 250th anniversary of the relationship between the two countries. We also know that President Trump is a fan of King Charles. He's repeatedly said he's a great guy, he's a friend. Trump did say that the King's visit could help repair the transatlantic relationship. And he also told a British newspaper this month that he believes King Charles would have a very different stance on the war in Iran from Keir Starmer. But King Charles will almost certainly not want to be discussing that, certainly not in public. What will happen over the next few days remains to be seen.
Orla, there were some doubts about whether this trip would even go ahead. I understand some British lawmakers did not support this visit.
And even up until yesterday, Marco, there were questions about whether it would go ahead. Yesterday morning, the questions were more about whether enough security was in place for the royal visit after the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday night. There was a lot of concern about what kind of security would be in place. But more broadly, as you say, there's also been questions from British lawmakers, opposition lawmakers in particular, who say that the visit should not go ahead because of the US and Israeli attack on Iran, because of what President Trump has said about Keir Starmer. You know, he said that Britain hasn't been helpful. Starmer is no Winston Churchill, referring to Britain's wartime leader. He's been hugely critical of Britain in the past few weeks. And Ed Davey, who's the leader of the Liberal Democrats, one of the opposition parties in Britain, has been calling for the trip to be cancelled. This is Davey speaking in Parliament earlier this month.
So will the Prime Minister advise the King to call off his state visits to Washington before it's too late? Because I really fear for what Trump might say or do while our King is forced to stand by his side. We cannot put His Majesty in that position.
So what is planned for the state visit by King Charles and Queen Camilla? I mean, imagining it's going to be pretty choreographed.
Absolutely. It's going to start, we understand, with the red carpet ceremony. Then there's going to be a garden party with tea at the British Embassy, a British way of doing things. And then tomorrow, the King meets with President Trump at the Oval Office. Now, what our understanding is that there will be a photo session, but there will be no question and answer session with reporters. We know, most famously with Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, how things can go awry on live television in the Oval Office and Buckingham Palace. I'm imagining will have been very clear with the British government about saying we want you to ensure that every effort is made so that King Charles is not humiliated in any way on this trip. But we also know that President Trump likes to do things his way. So we'll see what happens there, whether there are some sort of off-the-cuff remarks to the press, etc. King Charles will then address Congress in the afternoon. That's going to be broadcast live internationally on television. There's a state banquet Tuesday evening, and then they head to New York. They'll be meeting Zoran Mamdani in New York and attending a memorial for the victims of September the 11th. This year is the 25th anniversary, and that's the start of marking that. And then on the last day, they will spend it in Virginia, marking the 250th anniversary of the US.
And what about from King Charles's perspective? I mean, the last time a monarch from Great Britain visited the U.S., it was his mother. How significant is this visit for Charles?
It is. It's hugely significant. You're right, because the shadow of his late mother hangs over him. Queen Elizabeth, she was the first and so far only British monarch to address Congress. She gave a speech there back in 1991, and at the time she talked about the shared democratic transitions of the UK and the US, and she quoted Abraham Lincoln and she quoted Roosevelt. We don't know what he's going to talk about, but I was talking to Tim Bale about this. He's a politics professor at Queen Mary University of London, and he was saying, yeah, it's a pretty big deal for King Charles.
He feels the weight of history very strongly, and obviously the purpose of this visit, originally anyway, was to celebrate the anniversary. I think, obviously, he is also aware of the responsibility that he bears to the UK government. He must be aware that his role here is to smooth over some of the difficulties that have recently appeared in the Anglo-American relationship.
Yeah, speaking of current events, Orla, and the King's brother, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the former Duke of York before Queen Elizabeth removed his title, he has featured heavily in the Epstein files. And I gather there are calls for Charles and Camilla to meet with survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. Is that meeting going to happen?
Very unlikely. There was a request made by survivors and Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna to Buckingham Palace for a private meeting with the monarch. Lawyers representing King Charles said because of ongoing police inquiries, he won't be able to meet survivors. Now, just because the palace has refused the meeting doesn't mean the victims won't be heard. Our understanding is there is a protest planned tomorrow evening outside the White House involving Epstein survivors, and they say they're planning to demonstrate while the state banquet is underway inside.
The world's Orla Barry keeping us on top of the state visit by King Charles III and Queen Camilla to the U.S. that began today. Orla, thanks very much.
You're welcome, Marco.
You're with the world. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. In Syria, landmark trials aimed at bringing members of the former Assad regime to justice have begun.
The country's ousted former president, Bashar al-Assad, is being tried in absentia, as is his brother. But former security chief Atef Najib faces his trial in a cell inside the courtroom. He's accused of crimes against the Syrian people. Those very people can enter the courtroom, walk right by him, and speak their minds.
Yesterday, as the trial started, visitors taunted Najib, cursed him, called him a pig.
To help us understand why passions around his trial are so inflamed, Syrian historian Amr Al-Azam joined us today from Doha.
Atef Najib was considered to be the reason that sparked off the uprising in Syria back in 2011. Listeners might recall a group of school children scribbled on the walls of their school the words, "Ijak dor ya doktor," which translates as, "Your turn is coming, doctor," meaning Bashar al-Assad. They caught this group of children, and the person responsible for the security of the Daraa region, which is in the southern part of Syria, was Atef Najib. These children were very badly mistreated. They were tortured, they were beaten, they were burnt. After a few days, the parents of the children basically demanded the return of their children and went up to Atef Najib's office to say, look, okay, the children, misbehaved. Now give them back to us. We want them back. And Atef Najib refused and told them that they should consider that they have no children and should go away and make new ones. And if they can't, he would use his own soldiers against their wives to make new ones for them. This, of course, inflamed people's emotions, and it kind of exploded from there.
So Atef Najib's charges relate to crimes against the Syrian people. Did his crimes against the people end there? Are there other examples of crimes he allegedly committed and his role in them?
I'm sure, look, as any member of the security forces under the Assad regime, he must have committed many, many crimes. He would have been responsible for the incarceration, imprisonment, and torture of many people throughout his tenure, for sure. But in terms of what he's famous for, it's this one event. But you could take any member of the Assad security forces and you would put them on trial, and they would be charges against them for committing all sorts of acts of violence, torture, illegal imprisonment without trial, and so on and so forth.
Have those trials happened yet, though?
They're starting. Obviously, this is the beginning. They've gathered a group of people who they've been arresting over a period of time. The most recent and most famous, obviously, is beyond Atef Najib, is Amjad Yusuf, who was arrested, I believe, 2 or 3 days ago. And he was responsible for the horrific massacres of Tadamun in 2013, where he had himself videoed basically leading people to the edge of a pit, throwing them into the pit, shooting at them, and then setting fire to them. And there are several, in fact, mass graves attributed to this individual. And so he's going to end up also going to go on trial, and there'll be others like him. And so, yeah, this is the start of a longer process, and we hope it will begin the process of healing for Syrians in due course.
Right. So as to Atef Najib, for example, when you say the defendants will be facing some sort of justice, what kind of punishment would someone like Atef Najib be dealing with?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up receiving some sort of either life sentence or quite probably a death sentence for crimes committed.
I mean, some might see parallels to denazification, people who worked with the old regime, who did terrible things. Is it clear that everybody's going to face justice?
No, unfortunately not. And this is one of the issues that is being currently debated amongst people, and there have been voices raised against that. So on the one hand, you have people like Atef Najib and Amjad Yusuf who've been arrested, who are going to end up being put on trial and hopefully face some sort of justice. However, there are others who are also accused of having committed various crimes, whether through providing financial and economic support to the regime, like the Hamsho family, or like Fadi Sakr, who was essentially Amjad Yusuf's superior. And the questions are, why aren't these people being brought to trial? Why have these people been able to essentially get a settlement arrangement, which was done privately and in secret almost? And yet others like Amjad Yusuf and Atif Najib have been brought to trial. And there are different reasons. With people like Amjad Yusuf, obviously, they have no use to the current administration, whereas someone like Hamshel, who's very wealthy as well and made a lot of money. I mean, he was wealthy before the war and he made even more money for himself and the regime during the war. Someone like him basically was brought in. They made a private settlement arrangement for him in return for him handing over a substantial amount of the wealth he had accumulated during the war.
And it's not clear, is it, the good guys and the bad guys during Syria's civil war? It's a complex picture with many distinct factions fighting each other, not only the regime, there were militias, terrorist fighting groups, opportunists.
Of course.
Are there any members of non-regime groups facing justice for their role in war crimes against the Syrian people?
And that's part of the problem. There aren't. And in fact, one very well-known case that is currently being sort of discussed publicly and openly is al-Buwaidani, who was the leader of Jaish al-Islam and who has spent the last year under arrest in the UAE. And he was the leader of Jaish al-Islam. And President al-Shara just got him released from his prison in the Emirates and brought him back to Syria, and where he was met and greeted as a hero.
There are these trials, but is there also vigilantism happening against members of the former regime and extrajudicial killings?
Yes, and that, again, it takes us back to the real core issue, which is the lack of a clear process for transitional justice. You know, over the last year and a half, we're seeing this increase in vigilantism, increase in people taking matters into their own hands as they wait, and there is no sign of any process that would address their grievances. There are very deep-felt grievances amongst many Syrian communities. During the war, these communities lived side by side, sometimes across the street from each other, sometimes just one or two villages down. And people from one side of the street or one village or one community attacked another community, committed atrocities against them, and now the people want justice. And if you don't have a process that allows for these people to get some sort of sense of justice in return, eventually people will lose patience and will start to act on their own. And that's what we're seeing.
Amr, is it clear how many defendants the government will be prosecuting and what the timeline is?
Because there is no clear framework, because there's no management of expectations even, we just don't have that kind of information. There's a list, probably we can expect 40, 50 people right now they're planning to eventually prosecute. We'll see how many of those even make it to trial. Right now, we have Atif Najib and obviously Bashar and his brother in absentia. This is just the start of it all. We will have to wait and see.
That was Amr Al-Azam, a historian at Shawnee State University. He joined us from Doha.
The impact that war in Iran has had on economies abroad has gotten lots of attention. But what about the economy inside Iran? We'll hear how Iranians are getting by just ahead. This is The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. A ceasefire is holding in Iran and life is slowly returning to normal. A new normal, that is, as people grapple with the impacts the war has had on their country. Some business owners have had to close up shop and have no income. Others have seen their operations disrupted because of the ongoing internet blackout in Iran. The World's Shirin Jafari has been following all of this. Shirin, can you tell me more about what this new normal looks like on the ground?
Yeah, so the war went on for about 2 months. That's 2 months of intense, almost daily bombardments all over the country, but mainly in the capital, Tehran. And that has meant a lot of disruption for the economy. So it was a state of emergency, right? And what that has translated into is that, in particular, smaller businesses are closing down. And I am seeing almost on a daily basis, cafes, nail salons, and other businesses announcing announcing their closure, or they are letting some of their staff go because they can't afford to keep them. So many people in my network are expressing a sense of anger and helplessness about this situation, more so given the fact that the talks between the U.S. and Iran seem to be, stalled and they're not going anywhere.
I mentioned the internet blackout that the government continues to impose. Of course, the internet is not just, about posting on TikTok. Businesses rely on it. What are you hearing about how that is impacting jobs?
Yes, absolutely. So this is the longest internet shutdown any country has ever experienced. About 60 days of limited or no access to the internet for the majority of people. And one thing that people sometimes overlook is that Iran is actually a very digitalized economy. I spoke with Esfandiar Batmanqilij about this. He's the CEO of Borsan Bazar. That's a think tank focused on Iran's economy.
You have a whole ecosystem of basically entrepreneurs who are involved in e-commerce and other forms of monetized activity online. The internet shutdown has been really devastating for them. It has been weeks since people who make a living selling goods and services online have been able to do so.
Batmanqilij says the government may need to consider packages of financial support to help people and to stabilize the economy, but it doesn't have the budget needed to do that. That's, in a sense, why it needs to come to an agreement with the U.S. to end the war.
So we've been talking about businesses, business owners. What about regular folks? How are prices for the kinds of things that everyone needs to buy every week in Iran right now?
Everything is much more expensive now. Food inflation in Iran is among the highest globally. Cooking oil is up 40%. Rice has nearly doubled. And that means less food on the table for many Iranian families. One person told me, we go to sleep and wake up to everything being twice what it was before.
Wow. So how are people getting by if prices are higher and then all these people are out of work too?
I saw a post on social media recently that said some families are selling precious items like gold and jewelry to buy essential items. I've also seen some businesses announce online that they have no choice but to increase their prices. One dentist in Tehran apologized in a post online saying that he understands that everybody is going through a rough time financially, but that he has no choice but to raise prices for his services.
And I wonder what impact is the Strait of Hormuz being closed having within Iran? We have been hearing about its global impact, but less so about within Iran.
One of the ironies of this situation is that Iran saw the closure of the Strait of Hormuz as a way to punish the U.S. and its allies for starting this war, but it has had an impact on its own economy. First of all, the U.S. has imposed a blockade preventing ships from entering or leaving Iranian ports. And also, when the strait is closed, Iran itself doesn't have the same capacity to sell its oil or import goods. Let's have a listen to Esfandiar Batmanqilij again.
The war is very expensive for the government itself, not least because of the disruptions to oil exports that make up a majority share of the government's fiscal capacity.
He says that despite the pressures on Iran's economy, the leaders think that they can outlast the U.S. and its allies in the region in terms of tolerating the economic pain of this war.
Iran can probably continue to limp along economically for another maybe 4 or 5 months before the crisis gets really dire. The expectation of Iranian leaders will be that the Gulf states, Israel, the U.S., the wider countries in the global economy are not going to be able to tolerate the kinds of disruptions that we're seeing.
So that is the gamble that the Iranian leadership is taking, he says. They're more interested in resetting the relationship with the U.S. and Israel in a way that there isn't going to be another attack like the ones we have seen in March and last summer.
One of the major impetuses behind the anti-government protests last December was the state of the economy, and now it is even worse. How is that impacting how people are seeing the government today?
The experts that I talk to say this is going to be twofold. On the one hand, every time you have a war, there is going to be a disruption in political and social activism. Something that the US and Israel had hoped for was that once the bombs start falling, Iranians would come out to the streets and bring down the government. That didn't happen. But of course, the discontent has not gone away. Maybe it will even worsen given the economic situation. What shape that is going to take, we'll just have to wait and see.
The World's Shirin Jafari, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
10 days ago, the U.S. data and analytics company Palantir posted a 22-point manifesto on X. Those 22 points basically summed up a book by the firm's CEO, Alex Karp, and has variously been described as the ramblings of a supervillain and a parody of a RoboCop film. But that manifesto is not fiction, and it has renewed concern about how governments could use Palantir's data to monitor citizens. In the UK, Palantir has secured lucrative government contracts, including at the Ministry of Defense, Police, and the National Health Service, or NHS. As Large Bavanger reports from Manchester, England, it's that NHS contract that is most controversial.
Here it comes.
This is how the White House has been promoting US military might in social media. Palantir's AI tools play an increasingly important role in target decision-making, including during recent attacks on Iran. This is one of the reasons many here in the UK are questioning the ethics of the government's NHS contract with Palantir.
So when I was in opposition and I was the Shadow Health and Social Care Secretary, I asked lots of questions about the contract our predecessors signed at the time.
Wes Streeting is the health minister in Keir Starmer's Labour government. Here he is talking to the Guardian newspaper, defending his decision to honour the former Conservative government's decision to hire Palantir to process health data with the aim to improve NHS care.
And I was assured that, firstly, the data stays here in the UK. Secondly, it is owned by us. The platform they've given us to use to improve our systems is run by the NHS. Palantir don't see our patient data. Now I'm in government, I'm in an even better position to continue to assure myself and the public that that remains the case.
We're just here at the Whittington Hospital to go and tell the board, who are having a meeting, that we don't want Palantir and the NHS.
But the Health Secretary's assurances are not enough for campaigners like Duncan McCann. He's the tech and data lead at the legal campaign group, the Good Law Project.
Sadly, Palantir's track record is a track record of, really poor partnerships, be it with Donald Trump, facilitating ICE and deportations. And, that's indeed where we've seen them actually pull data from medical records and other places to help ICE, target and refine their immigration searches. We know that this is a company that has been selling its services to the Netanyahu government as well in Israel, and has at some degree been involved in what Israel is doing in the occupied territories and Gaza.
Right, we are going to bring you the latest government figures on COVID-19 cases. The UK has reported a record...
The NHS contract with Palantir stems from 2020, when the US company was hired to help the British government fight the COVID pandemic. In 2023, Palantir was awarded an NHS contract worth €380 million over 7 years, with a much broader scope. Duncan McCann from the Good Law Project says patients and doctors have been telling them that Palantir's expanded access is impacting people's trust in the NHS.
Trust is absolutely vital between patients and our health system. A survey's been done here in the UK that if Palantir were again to be fully integrated into our health system, that almost 50% of people might choose to opt out of sharing their data. This would not stop Palantir getting access to that data. What it would stop is that data being available to researchers, being able to find new drugs.
Opting out doesn't stop GPs and hospitals to hold patient data, which is crucial for care. And that means this data will still be fed through Palantir's systems for analysis. There are other objections to Palantir in the NHS beyond the ethical and moral ones. Several regional NHS organisations say they already have well-functioning systems that collate data and allow them to be as efficient as possible, including my own local Greater Manchester NHS. They did not, however, agree to an interview. So I called Rory Sallen-Jones, former BBC technology correspondent and now an active commentator on technology and health. He has been speaking to several sources in the NHS, making that same argument about Palantir's tools for the health service.
The first person who got in touch came to the conclusion that it's actually not very good. The other big criticism, that there was mission creep happening, that it had been brought in to do one thing and then was being foisted on them in all sorts of other areas, at quite some expense as well, that in terms of retraining staff who had got used to a whole bunch of programs they felt worked and were being told to use Palantir programs that they thought were not up to much.
Palantir has not answered a request for an interview for this report. The current Labour government maintains that data and citizens' rights will remain protected. Yet other political parties take a different stance. Nigel Farage's right-wing Reform Party is currently polling top ahead of both Labour and the Conservatives. And it has plans to share data between various government agencies, including the NHS, to identify illegal migrants and deport them.
That was DW's Lars Bavanger for Inside Europe. A Kenyan runner just finished a marathon in under 2 hours. What makes runners from Kenya so dominant? That conversation is next. You're listening to The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. History was made yesterday at the London Marathon. Twice, 2 runners ran the marathon in under 2 hours, both smashing the previous world record. Sebastian Sawe of Kenya won the race in 1:59:30. Coming in just 11 seconds behind him was Yomif Kegelcha from Ethiopia. David Monti is the editor and publisher of Race Results Weekly, a news and data service for the running world. He has been following marathons all over the world for more than 30 years, and still, he says, this record caught him by surprise.
I'll be honest with you, I didn't think I'd ever see this happen, but here we are, and it happened with 2 men doing it, and the second man, Yomif Kegelcha, had never even run a marathon before, and he did it. So that shows you that some things have really changed, and the big one is shoe technology, which really has brought faster running to more people using these carbon plates that are embedded in the sole of the shoe, which acts as a little bit of a propulsion unit to push you forward. Obviously, the runners are still doing all the work, but this does make running faster and more efficient.
So the 2 world record breakers here, Sebastian Sawe of Kenya and Yomif Kegelcha of Ethiopia, they're from countries that have absolutely dominated distance running for decades. I was hoping to get you to kind of sketch out the history of that dominance for me. When did these East African nations start winning basically all of the international races?
It's built up very slowly over time, but in the last 20 years, the marathon has just been owned by Kenyan and Ethiopian athletes. They are pushed forward by a culture of running. Many of them learn to run used as transportation when they are young, but also by the economic opportunities that running opens up to them. Sebastian Sawe, as we say in the running industry, above the table, made $355,000 yesterday for setting that world record.
Wow.
He probably made hundreds of thousands of dollars more from his shoe company that sponsors him.
And endorsements and ad deals and the like.
Yes, and that's a lot of money for anyone, but for people from these East African nations, it's a massive amount of money.
Can you tell me more about how people, even kids, use running as transportation in Kenya?
It's very typical for children to run to school. A typical distance for a kid to run to school would be about 5 kilometers or about 3 miles. It's just faster than walking. And kids just start running at a very young age, run without shoes, and their feet and lower legs become very toughened to this activity, just part of everyday life.
So we've talked about kind of the cultural aspects, the economic aspects. I want to talk about training. You visited Kenya and the city of Eldoret a couple of decades ago. This is where many of these elite runners train. What did you see there that helps explain, another reason why these runners are so fabulous?
Again, it's opportunity. The shoe companies and private coaches set up camps there. They look for athletes with talent. They bring them into these camps, and guys and gals can just get out there on the road and run for miles and miles and miles and build themselves up to the point that they can be recruited for running in races, mostly in Europe, Japan, and the United States, where they can make money. And I remember I was there, I was a decent recreational runner, and I was out on the road, and I was immediately joined by children who just were barefoot and saw me running and just went along to run with me, I guess thinking I was some kind of athlete.
And those kids could keep up with you as a decent recreational adult runner with probably pretty decent shoes.
Without even trying.
Yeah. Is there also an element of geography here? Do they train at altitude?
Yes, being born at altitude is hugely important. Being raised at altitude is important, and training at altitude is important. So that is being emulated now all around the world. In the United States, for instance, Flagstaff, Arizona is now the mecca of altitude training. And, dozens of top athletes live there because it's at over 7,000 feet and has good running.
And over 7,000 feet, the altitude means that there's less oxygen in the air. And so you're training yourself to run better under lower oxygen conditions. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
There is a darker side to the dominance of Kenyan runners, I think specifically, although maybe other East African runners. There's been a lot of doping. There's a lot of runners on doping bans right now. Where does that stand?
It's a difficult situation. Kenya has been on the watch list of the Athletics Integrity Unit and the World Anti-Doping Agency for some time. There are more than 100 Kenyan athletes currently serving doping bans. Many of them are not top-level athletes. They're second and third-level athletes who are just good enough to get into a smaller race. And they feel as though, if they don't do something extra to help themselves get better, they're not going to make any money.
There was another record set yesterday by the leading woman who is also from Ethiopia. She broke her own women's only marathon world record, which I understand means she didn't have male pacers. Can you tell us more about her?
Tigist Assefa was the London champion, was an 800-meter runner, a decent one, good enough to get into the Olympic Games. But she reinvented herself as a marathoner. And that's not surprising because the financial rewards in the marathon are far greater than they are on the track. And, she was briefly the world record holder in the marathon for the open division, which includes, men running with women. And she broke her own women-only record at London.
Looking ahead, when the 4-minute mile barrier was broken and people learned that was possible, Roger Bannister, decades ago, then you saw all kinds of people running under 4-minute miles. Like, it's very common now. What do you expect to see now that the 2-hour barrier has been broken in the marathon?
This is really fascinating. If I were still a race organizer, I used to work for the New York City Marathon. Am I now looking differently at athletes? Do I need to have somebody in my race who's broken 2 hours? Is that the new elite level benchmark that everyone will be looking at? Like, this is a huge mind shift for everyone. It was thought to be impossible. Eliud Kipchoge did it in an exhibition race and proved that at least somebody could do it if the conditions were perfect. And I feel for sure that more athletes will see in their mind that it is possible, that maybe they can also do it. I expect to see every top race organizer now attempting to get their winner to come very close to the 2-hour mark.
David Monti is the editor and publisher of Race Results Weekly, a news and data service for the running world.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. You can find us online anytime at theworld.org and check out more of our original reporting on YouTube. We are at The World News GBH. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Join us back here again tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Renee Vacchio-Albi, Roman Mars, the Kelson Foundation, and the Ken and Lucy Lehman family. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.